like to call a Budget Review Committee to order. It's April 4th, 2019, 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Laurie Wilshire is on vacation. Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly is present. Alderman at Large David Tenza. Present. And Alderman Jan Smith is excused with illness. Also in attendance is our chair, Richard Dowd.
Okay.
And Alderman Clayton.
This side of the room has got no budget.
Yeah, no budget.
I would
Okay,
have got there.
so the first item
Patience.
on the agenda is public comment. I see no one for public comment. Communications,
None?
unfinished business,
There is none.
new business.
There is none.
Okay, R 18-102 was tabled in committee. It'll stay tabled because we have not heard back from the negotiating team. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a motion on R-19-123 relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2020 proposed budget for the City of Nashua General, Enterprise, and Special Revenue Funds. A public hearing is scheduled for May 16, 2019 at 7 p.m. at Nashua North High School Auditorium.
You want to take it from the table?
Yes.
Motion is to take.
Oh, I thought I already said take it from the table.
Motion is for R 19-123 to take it from the table. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. And tonight, we're going to be talking about the other portion of general government. First Department's 131 Hunt Building. Appropriations are on page 96. So anyone here to talk about you coming up? Mr. Cummings. Director Cummings.
Good evening. For the record, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development. I'm here this evening to discuss or present or ask for your consideration for a couple budgets this evening: Hunt Building, Parking Operations, Economic Development.
Okay, just one question I have off the top. Just gotta go back to this page. I see there's revenue for parking, but is there no revenue that comes in for the Hunt Building? Or is that a special revenue fund?
That's exactly right. So the revenue that does come in comes into a special revenue
Okay,
fund.
so the special revenue fund is back in the pink pages. I can find the Hunt Building. Hunt Building is on page 303. And it looks like revenues are down.
Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding. Slightly down, I
It was
believe.
53,240 last year,
Yep.
and it's 5,600 this year. And 8-month,
Did you say
To-
page 303?
303,
Top of the page. Okay.
pink. And actuals are 26,840.
Yep.
Yeah, I suppose that's about right, yep. Are we fully occupied?
Now we are. I would say for the better half of last year, we were not.
Okay.
But we are back, actually, for the first time, as I understand it, 100% occupied.
And it looks like, is it because we're full, that marketing's gone down?
I mean, for marketing the,
It was 5,000 last year, it's 2,500 this year.
yeah, that, I don't know why that particular line item may have dropped a little bit.
I mean, it was probably the marketing to get somebody to go in there, but if they're all full.
I-
And one question I have here, which I have in some of the other departments, is electricity, heating, water, all level from last year? I know they went up.
So we defer to the finance team in terms of plugging in the utility figures. So that's probably a better question for them.
All right.
But yes, I agree with you. They probably have gone up. Maybe we didn't know necessarily at the time.
And there's $204 for cellular telephone. We have a full-time person?
Yep.
That's pretty low for a cell phone.
I think that is contracted at what is contractually obligated for us. We only receive City Hall employees, I think, a $50 stipend,
Okay.
or it really depends on the level. I think $50 is the most that you get.
Okay. I do know, it looks like special events, like, tripled.
I do know that, and so that's why I'm not exactly sure about the marketing, because some of what might be credited in the marketing is maybe now in the special events, because a lot of the marketing is special events in nature. At the end of the day, it's my understanding that the budget evened out and is under guideline.
Okay.
Correct, because the special revenue fund picks up the other half,
Any questions on the
which is the question I thought.
Alderman Clements and Alderman Kelly?
Just briefly, so was this budget created before the building was fully occupied?
Yeah, I don't know specifically as to when this budget was created, being early spring, late winter, building being fully occupied, probably late fall, early, it was probably right around the same time, literally.
Did we, in order to get it full, did we drop some of the rents, or anything like that, or?
So the rents are articulated in the lease agreement that has been approved by the Board of Aldermen. I believe that the rents have been adjusted to be market rate, based off of what we're seeing currently in the market, and then understanding that the space that was left in the Hunt building was actually not the most desirable of spaces. It was like basement space. So to answer your question, yes, I believe some of the rental rate has dropped due to those reasons.
Okay, so that would probably reflect why the rental income is down, then, I would assume. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Maybe we get some feedback. I know what you're saying, that the rent last year was $24,240. We
Right.
rented an additional space, and this year they got it down at $21,600. Somehow that doesn't equate unless, can we get some kind of an explanation?
Well, the building was pretty empty for,
You know, but
Quite
the
a
rental that we took in last year, well,
Well, that's,
I guess that was what was proposed. We only had taken in 10.5 in 8 months, so, yeah, maybe. I don't know why we had the original 24,240 projection then, if that was full occupancy.
I don't know.
All right,
Yeah.
Hunt Building appropriations are on page 96.
We'll get it now.
We have, oh, Alderman Kelly, you had a question?
I have the same question.
Same question?
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's possible for us to find out where the rental agreements are and just take a look at them, I would like to see that.
Yeah, that was the feedback we're supposed to get.
Sure.
Okay, and if, I don't know who can get that for you, Director Cummings, but if you could filter that through Sue Lovering so she can get it out to the board.
What is this exactly?
Are you talking about the revenue that
The
comes in?
revenues,
That would
why
be
the
Amy.
revenues were anticipated last year at 24, were fully occupied, and the revenue this year is 21. Curious.
Yeah, Amy should have those numbers. She
Yeah,
hasn't had a meeting for a few months, so I don't know. I'm on the hunt board, so she hasn't had a meeting, I think since December.
So the revenue difference in the budget as to what was,
Projected for last year
yeah, proposed in 19.
versus what's proposed for 20, even though we're fully occupied now.
Yes, okay. Again, I think it's because the rental rates have gone down.
And if you look at the appropriations, the total Hunt Building appropriations are 30,000, we're getting 21,000 in rent, so we have other,
Yes, you do. Just walk me through what you're saying.
I just, it's almost answering my own question, where's the total revenue? So total appropriations for the Hunt Building are 50. And okay. So you get facilities, event fees and all that stuff, though, pretty much flushes out even, okay. Any questions about the Hunt Building appropriations? Nope, okay. Next is, parking operations, revenues on page 34, and appropriations are on page 97. So, parking. You want any overview on this, Director Cummings, or?
Everything is pretty much the same as last year. Revenue, I don't believe they've changed, or the projections on that. Those should be comparably the same as last year's, and similar with the parking operations services being delivered. They're all pretty comparable to last year's. Level services and under guidelined.
So, I thought we were going to new parking meters.
No, there has been a conversation about piloting some parking meters in certain lots in the city that would accept credit cards. But that conversation hasn't come to fruition yet because the proposed vendor that would like to do it, there would be a cost borne onto the city for that pilot, and I don't think that would be appropriate, that it shouldn't be a cost onto the city. So that really hasn't moved forward yet. There are pay stations proposed in different areas, and we've talked about maybe adding some pay stations, but you have to be careful to make sure that you have enough volume to warrant the pay stations, because there's an additional credit card service fee. So you don't want to necessarily put those pay stations where we would take a little bit of a loss if we weren't doing enough of the transactions. And then it should be noted that the current meters that are out on the street, we are running out of. Actually, we don't have a lot of parking meter, quote unquote, heads left. So a decision at some point is going to be necessary as to whether we want to invest more in meters or in pay stations, or try to push people to use the app, the pay by phone app, which is the best deal for the city, but may not be the most consumer friendly, because you are paying a convenience fee to use that. So we haven't had that conversation in detail. It's probably one we should have in the next year or two. But there is no plan imminently to roll out new parking meters.
So hypothetically, if you had a parking meter and you're staying there for an hour and you put 50 cents in for an hour, if you use that service, what would the fee be for?
I would have to double check this, but I'm pretty sure it's $1.
So you want a 50-cent parking meter and it costs you $1 additional besides the 50 cents to park for an hour. No
People,
wonder nobody's using it.
oh no, people pay it happily.
I use it.
People pay it happily because I think it's a generational issue. I think the younger generation is much more wanting to see convenience and are willing to pay for convenience. I think the demographic and generation that tends to be a little bit older, is willing to forego that convenience and pay just the straight meter amount.
Talking to you.
I thought he was talking about you.
I think I put that pretty diplomatically.
Actually, can I add?
Very eloquent.
I
Very
think-
eloquent.
I
Very
actually think
eloquent.
the older
Alderman Cleve?
I actually think the older generation is also, I've been to a number of meetings where people like the convenience of doing it, and then it tells them
When it's
when it's
expiring.
up, and then they can add to it, so, yeah, I think it's being more popular.
It would be more problematic if we had enough people around watching when it expires, but anyway.
Yeah.
Alderman Clemens, then Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. When I was last on the Board of Aldermen a few years ago, I know that I had a conversation with Jill, and they removed the parking meters from the library lot. And part of the reason for that was because we were running out of meter heads. I think at that point, there was only like 3 or 4 of them.
40, but yes, correct.
Well, I mean, right, we recovered 40 from there. How much of that stock is gone?
Great question. We have just, somewhere between 30 and 40 still remaining. We've only used 5 to 10.
Okay.
But that's the last available heads that we have for available replacement heads, if you will.
Correct me if I'm
Well-
wrong, but the public library has meters on it now.
Mm-mm.
Because I've had people come up to me and say that they feel they shouldn't have to pay when they go visit the library.
Yeah,
Alderman Clemens?
that's
That's the issue.
it's the pay station though. They're not meters. It's a pay station.
Let me put it differently. You get ticketed if you didn't.
If you don't pay the
for
pay station, yes.
Yeah, so like I'm saying, there's a lot of people that are
But-
upset that they have to pay to park to go to the public library.
Right.
So your point is well taken. The meters are not there anymore. We have a pay station there. I do know we've heard a lot of feedback that one pay station may not be enough, and there's a lot of waiting that occurs, especially at certain periods of the day. So we are trying to assess whether it would make sense to add an additional station to eliminate that. And so that may be occurring, but that's a $10,000 cost that we will potentially be proposing to you. When we look to do something maybe in the fall.
So there are no free spaces at the library.
For patrons, no.
Only handicap.
I will say for the record, it's not just the library. If you come to City Hall, you're in the similar predicament.
Yeah, Alderman Clemens?
Thank you. So I know that there are a number of lots still out there that have meters. One, and you mentioned that there was a potential of maybe switching some of those over to the pay stations. The lot that comes to my mind is Maple Street, but what specifically are they, and what did you have in mind?
So we haven't had much more of a conversation as to if we pick lots. Spring Street lot comes to mind.
Okay.
Maple Street lot comes to mind, but we would want to do an evaluation to make sure they actually have the volume. I
Mhm.
think there could be some areas over by Water Street, particularly closer to the office building. It may make sense, and so There are other areas in the city where you may not want to do, in the downtown area, where you may not want to do a parking, to do a pay station. We currently um, don't charge directly for this, but I will say for the record, we own a municipal parking lot in the mill yard that is currently under lease, and if that lease doesn't continue and it turns back to the city to be managed, that parking lot, I would recommend having a pay station, so you're not putting meters. There's 100+ parking spaces out there, fully occupied, regularly during the day. It would probably be a good business decision to put, a couple pay stations out there. So that's the kind of analysis we need to do and come back to you with some recommendations as to where you want to make that investment and where you'll get a return.
Can I skip you,
Can I-
Alderman Clements?
Thank you. Sorry, I
follow
just,
up?
yeah, I think that would be a good thing to do. You know, I definitely agree with that. I think it would also, again, extend the life cycle of the existing meters, and give us some time to really pursue other vendors and kind of see which direction we want to go to. Is there anything in our clause, with the pay stations that we have now that says we have to continue to go with that, as we expand this?
Um, I don't believe so, no, but I think for a matter of just ease of doing business, that is how we've done it in terms of just keeping the same vendor. Um, and then adding on. But I guess in theory, we could have a different vendor who supported the pay stations, but that would be administratively pretty complicated.
Okay.
I will say we are under contract with that current vendor. That contract I know is coming up. It's a contract I would like to take a serious look at because I'll submit to the group here, and it's subject to negotiation. My understanding is we entered into the contract, and the city pays for the credit card transaction fee, whereas most municipalities I've seen have done it. It is actually pushed onto either the consumer, or it's enough volume is done where it's waived by the company. So we need to kind of have that conversation, because we could make a serious strategic mistake and put in a pay station and end up taking a loss if we don't do enough volume. And we obviously don't ever want to put ourselves in that position.
Alderman Kelly.
Thank you.
That was actually my question. I was looking at the credit card service fees, and I know we said you do get assessed a fee, but is that not covering all of it? Is that why
Correct.
it's coming back to us?
Correct.
So this line is new as of using the Pay by Phone app?
So the pay by phone app actually is one where it's completely borne onto the consumer. And that's the difference. So if you use a pay station, we pay the transaction
I
fee.
see.
If you use the app, the consumer pays it.
Okay.
From a municipality standpoint, in terms of bringing in revenue, we would want to push people to use the app more, because it's it's a better quote unquote deal for the municipality. But that's all a conversation to be had.
Okay.
The big thing is the pay stations. If we want to continue using the pay stations, think about maybe looking at that contract a little bit differently and see if we can work with a vendor where the transaction's waived because we do so much volume.
Another question, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings, recently, I think, the board eliminated the raise on fees on metered or leased parking spaces, and that seems to be in the limbo right now. But if that money was raised, would that probably help alleviate some of the purchasing of some of this equipment? Or is it a different fund, and that's what I'm looking at?
So it could, but it's not as straightforward of a transaction like you're suggesting. Excess funds would, in theory, actually go to the Downtown Improvement Committee, and then if they had the desire, they could, in theory, appropriate that money. but it wouldn't be just as cleanly or simply as new money being available so we can spend it on more parking equipment, or we can put it towards capital budget to pay for debt service on a big purchase. That is not how our accounting is currently set up.
Right, and a follow-up, if I may? Yeah, I don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. I'm just wondering if, it sounds like we need to improve our infrastructure as far as the collection data and whether we go with the apps or the machines or something like that. And just looking to see what would be the funding mechanism. But yet I don't want to take it away from the Downtown Improvement Committee if that's their sole source of income.
Which it
Because
is.
then we would have to replenish that in another venue as well, too, so.
It's a very sensitive conversation, and that's why I don't ever want to draw the correlation, as some people would like to do, that we'll raise the parking fees, and those fees would go to paying to help improve the infrastructure of parking, because you'd be robbing Paul to pay for Peter, to use your analogy, because then the Downtown Improvement Committee may not receive funds, or the conversation just needs to occur so everyone is comfortable with understanding that maybe you're capping the Downtown Improvement Committee to only receive a certain amount, and then this new revenue is going to such as what you suggest, paying for parking or another use in the downtown, whatever it may be. I mean, making infrastructure improvements. Our capital improvements for the parking structures are a concern. The paving in the parking lots are a concern, and unless the taxpayer, property taxpayer here in Nashua, is going to bear that cost, we may need to figure out some additional revenue.
Alderman Tenzo.
It's a good segue to additional revenue, because we talk about what other cities and towns are doing and how we're in line with them. And here, when someone gets a parking ticket, a $10 parking ticket for a violation increases to $20 after 10 days or 20 days, maybe 30 days, something like that. But a lot of other cities, Concord, Dover, and Keene, they increase their rates up to $60 if a parking ticket goes unpaid for more than 60 days. Is that something that your office would support as far as parking enforcement? Do you think that would generate a little bit more revenue? And would that then go back to the parking funds and the Downtown Improvement Committee?
It's a great question, if I may, and if I could take a few minutes to actually talk about that. Yes, to answer your question, I would support, and I know my department would support very much increasing the parking enforcement fees. Not because we're looking to collect new revenue, or but for the sole reason that we're trying to change behavior, and it needs to be an incentive to actually have people pay the parking meter. I've had more people point out to me that it's cheaper for them to leave their car parked in an area in the city here in Nashua, not pay the meter, get the ticket, than to just constantly pay the meter, because that's just a cheaper proposition for them. So it's not an incentive to actually change behavior. So you really need to change behavior to receive the compliance. I think we have stepped up enforcement, which is good, but we are nowhere near where our peer group is in terms of charging, fees or a penalty to get that type of behavior that we're looking for. And so that is something I would be looking to submit as legislation at some point to propose to the group. Once we've done the analysis, and we can show you what we think we should be making for a recommendation. I'll just take a quick second to then further say that money, though, goes into another account. That's a whole separate account that was until recently under the police purview and was used a lot for parking enforcement type of services. And when the city of Nashua's general government took it over and it came into economic development, that account was running at a deficit of about $30,000 a year. To date, we have a surplus, or we're running at approximately $140,000. So we not only brought it into the black, but we're also, it's a pay-as-you-go type of fund, so we are paying our expenses as we go, and we're seeing approximately a surplus of 140,000. It will be a very strategic conversation that this body needs to have, along with the mayor and the finance team, as to how you want to use those funds. And I would suggest one of the ways you'd want to use it is actually looking at making improvements to parking operations, parking enforcement, putting it back into parking, and that would be a good way of potentially bringing in new revenue. So long as we're constantly being diligent in how we're managing that account, we are very actively managing that fund. In terms of making sure we only have people on when you actually can write the tickets, making sure we are being very conscious. One thing I'm very proud of on the parking enforcement front is when we first took it over, we recalibrated. We heard from the public that maybe we were being a little too aggressive, so we implemented some strategies. For instance, if you park overnight, maybe you shouldn't. You're not going to get a ticket right away. You'll get a warning or two, then you might get a ticket. And so I think Nashua has quieted a little bit on that front. But on the flip side, we're also paying for the services as we go, and we're not running a deficit anymore. So that is to the credit of Jill Stansfield and her team. And I think we are. I didn't want to have this conversation too early, but I think we're getting to the point this summer where we're going to need to decide as to how you want to use those excess funds moving forward.
Is that a special revenue fund?
So not technically, because it was created prior to the special revenue funds. It was done in the 70s, I believe.
So where is it accounted for in this budget?
So it is, I believe, accounted for in the budget in the revenue section, or at least it should be. I was told it was being put in this year.
Yes, in the revenue. Where in the revenue?
Oh, I don't know. I would have to find it. I can get back to you on that.
Yeah, this is still under the police department, or is it?
No, I believe it would be under, I don't know which account it would be. Yeah. I don't want to hold this meeting up looking for it. I would want to get back to
No, if
you.
you could just get back to us and let us know where that is in the budget. You don't have to do that right now,
Okay, yeah.
okay? Alderman Clements.
I know for a fact that the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, is going through a similar thing right now because I park in Kendall Square. Well, when I drive in, I park in Kendall Square, and it's $35 a day to park there. Or it's $25 to park on a street and get a ticket. And usually what I do is park on the street, get the ticket, and then pay it. So I understand that that's an issue, and it really we really should be looking at for that we should be looking at what are the rates being charged in the private parking lots around downtown or even really around the city, and then we should raise our fees higher. And it's not to penalize anybody or anything like that, particularly if on a first offense, it's we can give a warning or something like that. But I agree with the Director Cummings that is something that that we should be adjusting to the market.
Alderman Clee.
I want to talk to that also. I can tell you that Jill and I have become best friends because I make regular phone calls to her relative to this. In my ward, we had a tractor trailer that was taking multiple parking and on a regular basis parking his vehicle there over by Mount Pleasant School. And he would get a ticket, and then every day that ticket would get paid. Next day he'd get a ticket. They'd get paid. And as long as he didn't have 3 outstanding tickets, we can't tow him. We
Right.
can't do any of that. We have a very dusty car in the parking garage. Very similar. They pay the ticket. And that's the problem is it doesn't matter how many tickets they get. I wouldn't want to see us for a first offense do a massive thing, because sometimes people make a mistake. For instance, the overnight parking, they may have parked there because a family member was too intoxicated or sick or something like that, and they had to do that. Those things happen. So I would not want to see the first one, but on multiple offenses, I would love to see something go up. I would love to see us have more teeth and more bite into that. But I know they're doing the very best that they possibly can. Jill hears from me constantly about this.
Any other questions on parking? Alderman O'Brien.
Well, it seems, I'm just taking a guess. Mr. Cummings, when it comes down to parking in the city, does the city take a little bit of a break? People go out of town during the summer and such, and so you see a decline in the revenue as compared to the winter time. I would imagine would be up more because people would focus more on a downtown experience. And that being said, if what I say is true, then we're coming right into the right season to tickle a couple of committee stuff as infrastructure or economic development to start to look at this. Am I correct?
You see the volume increase in the warmer months, definitely. So summertime, springtime, you definitely see more people
Oh, okay.
in the downtown. In the winter, the revenue drops a little bit, and it should be noted that we strategically know that that's coming because we typically waive parking for the better part of December, the parking fee.
Alderman Kelly.
I'm gonna leave it there. I'm good.
I have a question. The parking revenues are 720 projected, same as last year, 728, 420. But where's the cutoff that it goes to?
That 728.
Oh, so
And
the revenue's going to be higher, presumably, and the balance goes to the downtown. Okay.
So rough numbers, 728 to the Downtown Improvement Committee. Then you see another 300,000 to 400,000 pays for parking operations. Call it 350, and then another somewhere between 100 and 150,000, depending on the year, goes to the Downtown Improvement Committee.
Okay, where does that difference show up in the budget? Because first of all, the Downtown Improvement Committee, they have to come in here and ask for it, and we have to transfer it from somewhere to them, right?
So I believe that occurs now in the budget process
It's in the budget
in the
this year.
pink. Yeah, it's in the budget.
Yeah, but where?
We went over it the other night. It's,
In finance?
yeah.
Okay. All right. But there were two pieces to that you were talking about. This doesn't reflect the total revenue from the parking meters and leases. So you said for parking meters, anything over this number right here goes to the Downtown Improvement Committee,
But
which we don't know what that number will be, but it reflects somewhere else in the budget. And then you said there's another chunk of bucks that goes to maintenance?
to cover the services. So your point is well taken, and it's a conversation or a question that would probably be better for the finance team to answer. They're very conservative when they project their revenues as they should be. So I think what they try to do is just make sure that they cover the costs of the obligation. And because and I completely agree with this, because it's such a variable in terms of knowing what future revenue is going to be, you don't necessarily want to count on that when you're trying to put together a budget. So maybe discounting that a couple 100,000, knowing that it will, if it comes in, it will pay for the parking services of the city, is how I believe strategically they look at it.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that because it is a variable, and you don't want to overestimate because then your revenues are shot. Alderman Clements?
Well, right, and that's also why the calculation for what goes to the Downtown Improvement Committee is based on a calendar year. And that's CFO Griffin was talking about that the other night, because what that does is it allows you to calculate, what the number is in January, so you can insert that into the budget because we know how much we've collected.
Yeah, we've had that discussion because the budget year ends in the end of June, and it takes
Right.
them a few months to figure out exactly where we're at, and then they can donate or give the money to the downtown improvements, but, and I assume also they'll know how much they have for maintenance, but, just wanna know what the projections are. Alderman Tenzo?
Maybe this clarifies things, maybe not. Page 30, transfer to the Downtown Improvements Trust Fund.
Page 30?
Page 30, listed at $115,863.
That's right.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And that money will become available to them in
July.
July.
Yeah.
Which is what they will use then to fund their priorities.
Yeah, okay.
Can I make one other comment?
$40,000, yes.
Alderman Dowd?
Just a second. Alderman Clements?
Thank you. I wanted to just comment about the, it's going back a little bit earlier in our discussion here, but it was always, being one of the founding members of the Downtown Improvement Committee and the author of the legislation, I can tell you that, in my opinion, it's a responsibility of that committee to understand and to maintain their source of revenue. And the source of revenue there is the parking meters. It's the and the pay stations. So I don't think that it's unreasonable to go to that committee and say, you know, we want to, it's going to cost $10,000 to put a new pay station in, and that's going to reserve 15 or 20 meter heads, and that's going to make that cost go down for us because we're not going to have to go out and buy new meters for another year or two. So, you know, it's one of those things where you take responsibility for the way that you raise the revenue. And so, my opinion on that, the first year that the Downtown Improvement Committee existed, that's what they did. They put 40 grand towards the pay stations on Main Street, and the city covered a portion of it too. So I think that's really not an unreasonable thing to go and ask them, because that is their source of revenue, and they should be helping to maintain that source of revenue. Just my opinion.
Other questions for this area? No. All right, next is economic development, and the appropriations are on page 99.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Director
Uh,
Cummings.
So, again, you have a budget before you that is under guideline. Service delivery level is the exact same as the year before. I'll note that, you know, some of the accomplishments in FY19 and that we're proud of and continuing to work on. You know, we're constantly trying to bring the Performing Arts Center to fruition. We've, you know, reasonably well integrated both parking operations and parking enforcement. You know, the long labored and loved Renaissance project actually moved into the second phase. You've seen phase 1 under construction now. And my office has been in a little bit of a transition with the departure of the Mr. James Veo, and we have a new hire who actually just started on Monday, replacing him, a Nashua resident. His name is Komba Lamina. I'll be bringing him by shortly to introduce him to the Board of Aldermen. He is a wonderful gentleman who has a background in nonprofit work and working to help improve organizations and communities. And I'm pretty excited to have him on board. I will note how I was able to successfully structure his salary and make it work and meet the guideline. And this was how we actually handled James Veo's salary as well. For the record, part of his salary, approximately 30%, is being paid for out of the proceeds of the revolving loan fund that my office manages, which is not funds off of the general government fund, the general government fund, but 70% of his salary does come from that. Over the years, I was trying to align more of the downtown coordinator salary onto the general fund. That would free up money to actually put back into the community, and we would have more to loan out and put out onto the street. But to be able to obtain Mr. Lamina, we had to fall back to the plan that we did a couple years ago. So it's we had gotten to a 90-10 split last in FY19, or and that was from a 70-30, and now we're going back to more like of a 70-30 split. So that's just a background for you. That's a trend that I see that I want to make sure you are aware of, that you could possibly see in a future year a bump in the salary in terms of the line item in the general operations government budget, and I wanted to kind of telegraph that for you in advance. Relative to goals, sorry, I can take a question.
No.
So relative to goals, just quickly, and I wanted to kind of have this conversation with the group. Make sure you're in line and all of the same thought processes as my office is relative to the goals. We're looking to continue working on bringing the Performing Arts Center to fruition. That's I would never say that that's the number one priority, but I think we all know that that's the number one priority. But also looking to really seriously start to engage on the School Street parking lot and getting some development on that downtown site. You know, it's been hanging out there for a couple of years. And if the group wants to see it developed, I'm happy to continue to keep working on that project. It's not going to be easy, but if for the betterment of the downtown, if that's you're in line with your thinking, then that will continue to be a goal of mine. Thirdly, implementation of the riverfront plan. Big priority and goal of my office is to make sure that we implement that new expanded TIF. I'd like to come before this body, not necessarily the Budget Review Committee, but the Board of Aldermen, the Infrastructure Committee, or PEDC, or the full body, whatever the purview is of whatever is pleasurable by the group, to have a discussion about the implementation of the TIF. We are just starting to get up and running. We'll have our first meeting on April 9th. With the newly appointed TIF Advisory Committee, where we'll be looking to implement the TIF plan that was approved by this board. And so that's going to take some work to be able to do that. And so therefore it's a goal of mine and an objective that I've outlined in accomplishing this year. Other goals that are noted in my budget are just pretty strategic, standard type of goals that should be in my budget, and their long-term prospects in terms of implementing, strategic plans for the Downtown Improvement Committee, the Rail Committee, the BIDA, and whatnot. So that's just a quick update and overview of my department's budget.
Just quickly before I open up for questions, are the new apartment buildings, Cotton Mills and the other one, are they part of the TIF?
Lofts 34, Cotton Mill are both part of the TIF.
Okay, so the revenue generated from taxing on those two properties goes into the TIF.
The increment does, yes.
Okay. Alderwoman Kelly.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. So when you were talking about your new employee, and the revolving loan fund. I know some other departments use like grant money. Are there restrictions that come with using that for part of his salary?
Alderman, Director Cummings?
Yes, so there are restrictions in the sense that he has to work on the revolving loan fund, which is part of his job and part of the job description that is part of it. So that would be the biggest and only restriction, and so we definitely comply.
Great. If I could follow up.
Follow up?
You were talking about the Riverfront project, and you said that's one of your big goals. I was just interested, I know it's been a while since we talked about the TIF. Are we hoping that that project as it's phased will be completely covered by the TIF?
That is a really good question and really complex and detailed. So just to clarify, when you say the phase of the project, which phase?
I guess I was assuming that we were going to phase it. We're not going to do it all at once. So I'm just wondering, from a budgetary standpoint, do we think that the TIF is going to cover it as we do these projects, or are we going to have to start thinking of line items in your budget in the coming years?
Oh, to pay for?
Mhm.
Oh, good question. Well, no, I don't think that would be the intention or the plan. But I can't answer for you today. But hopefully in a couple months, I can come back to you and actually tell you what we actually see is in terms of feasible, in terms of cost, and how we would recommend the financing plan to pay for the various projects. Um, if any of you have an interest in attending the TIF committee, it's at noon on Tuesday, April 9th in room 208. It's a public meeting. You're all welcome. We'd love to have participation. And I say that because that is going to be one of the agenda items that we actually discuss at that meeting, is setting goals and priorities to phase the implementation of the TIF plan. And then we will see if we can align the resources and the funding mechanism necessary to be able to accomplish those goals.
Where is that gonna be again?
Room 208?
Room 208.
Yeah, he said. If I could, I have
Follow
one
up,
more, and then I'll
Alderwoman
finish.
Kelly.
Sure. You level funded your budget, but I just had a question around consulting services. I saw that it went up a bit, and I was just wondering what you're anticipating for that. Consulting's kind of a vague term.
Sure. Yeah, great question. During the escrow process here in the city, oftentimes you'll see in economic development that money is escrowed for quote unquote consulting services. And depending on what may be necessary, that is used along throughout the year. I depleted a lot of the escrowed money in consulting services this year, paying for a hotel market study, and paying for different type of engineering type studies for real estate consulting. Similarly, if I'm to follow the same path in terms of trying to achieve the goals as outlined, I suspect I will need to have access to some consulting money to be able to implement some of these goals. So, for instance, I would not be surprised if at some point, if a conversation starts to get serious with the developer and we are talking about developing the School Street lot, maybe we'll need to undertake a survey. That would be a $5,000 to $10,000 cost. And so having that consulting fee money available could help with that. A market analysis, engaging VHB to do a traffic study of Bowers Street, to understand the traffic flow, to possibly make it one way, would be where this would be the line item that would pay for those types of funds, assuming that engineering didn't pay for it out of DPW. But we haven't had that conversation yet. But that's what this type of money is used for, and I wanted to make sure I replenish some of the money that I had spent this year implementing some projects.
Thank you.
Other questions? Alderman Tenza.
Follow up on some of Alderwoman Kelly's questions about the riverfront, because I know that we've a lot of the work that's been started on the riverfront, as far as the master plan is concerned, is through is not necessarily through your office, it's through Director Marchand's office. Correct. So those funds that have already been appropriated for the invasive species cleanup and some lighting projects those are not contingent on the TIF. Those are going forward. I think they've already started.
Director Cummings?
Yes and no. They've definitely have already started, and I definitely know that some of those projects have their own funding sources. For instance, I think money has been set aside for lighting. But the invasive species removal, I fully think the TIF funding is anticipated to pay for that. Unless there's money that was set aside somewhere else that I'm not aware of, which I would have to talk to Director Marchand about. I know we're in constant communication over this specific issue to make sure we both know. We're working in tandem to understand what projects are happening out of her office, what projects are happening out of my office, and which source of funds will be paying for what. She's on the TIF committee that meets regularly and will be involved in the implementation of that master plan that came out of her office, which is the plan we're using to implement the TIF.
I was gonna ask you about whether one of your duties as assigned included working on the master plan that we're now funding. Alderman Tenza.
If I could just follow up, and this is probably more of a comment than a question, really. But so, I still think, and I have said it before, that the riverfront here in Nashua is a untapped resource for us, and I think that as much as the Performing Arts Center is going to bring people into the city, into the downtown, more in the evenings, I think the riverfront, once it could be developed a little bit more, be a huge asset to bring people, families to the downtown during the day, on weekends and every other time. So, not that you can prioritize things one over the other, but to the extent that any progress can be made quickly on that plan, I would be all for doing whatever we need to do to make that come together a little bit more and clean it up and make it a place where people want to go and walk around and enjoy the river.
Definitely.
Any others? Real quickly, a couple of updates on where we stand with the rotary in front of the bridge going to Hudson, and two, where are we on the redirection of the downtown streets?
So, the Rotary, and I just want to be clear, it's not a Rotary that is being proposed. But the traffic improvement project that we proposed to this body for the local managed project, the LPA project for the city of Nashua, has gotten to the point now where it's at the state, and the state is vetting it and looking to make comments and recommendations on it. Once they approve the engineering study that we did this summer, they will then allow us to move on to the next phase. So we're in a holding pattern right now, waiting for the state to provide us feedback and make sure that we're in alignment with their feedback. They've provided us some initial feedback, and we want to address their concerns and make sure we're both on the same page. Once we've worked out all those comments, we would be proceeding on to the design phase, which would take most of 19. And we were originally thinking we would start construction in the fall of 19. And the feedback we got from the state is that they believe, and I agree with this, we're probably now looking at a spring construction start of 2020. So that's where we are with that project, and we continuously are working to try to move that forward. I got a phone call today with folks telling me how bad the traffic was trying to go from Nashua into Hudson. It was pretty bad. So we hear you, and we're trying to work it as fast and quickly as possible. Relative to the reversal of the one-way streets, that project has moved as far along as possible in terms of public outreach, receiving feedback, talking to folks. We put out a concept plan. We have not advanced it any further than a concept plan and having conversations with various stakeholders. We've gotten feedback from some stakeholders that they didn't want to see the one-way plan implemented. We have received other feedback from others who are very, very passionate about this project, who thinks it definitely needs to occur. So there really hasn't been enough consensus yet where I felt it was appropriate for me to take any leadership to try to advance the project. But I do know it's a project that a lot of folks around around this horseshoe do want to see happen. So it's a conversation we're going to need to have at some point as to what direction we want to go.
I noticed that at the end of Pearl Street, and I think that's Central Street,
Yep.
that we finally changed the direction of the yield sign. The problem is that we have a fair amount of people in this city that don't know what the word yield means. And I noticed that we've had a police officer in his car sitting there making sure that people understand what yield means. I'm assuming they're either stopping or ticketing people that are not allowing the yield. But if I had a bulldozer, I'd change that intersection in about 3 days.
You would be both.
That is got something, if we're not gonna change the direction of streets anytime soon, we need to change that particular intersection, because there have been cars almost I'm down there quite a bit, almost every day there's somebody that's gonna get creamed.
So
Yes, Director Cummings.
So to that point, and that's a point well taken, not necessarily with the reversal of the one way. That's a whole separate project, but and what I'm about to say could be incorporated into that project, but also can be a standalone project, which we are actively working on, which is squaring off the oval. That I mean, I what has risen to the top and everyone seems to agree with is that area needs to be squared off. It appears as though the traffic can be calmed successfully and safely in that area by squaring off the oval. As you know, we squared off one end of it, and we are hopeful that we can square off the other end, which will, mitigate the issues you just spoke about. That project cost is going to be expensive, a couple $100,000, maybe a little more. We're going to need to find the money to do that. And so I flagged that for you because you have a lot of priorities and you're going to need to decide whether that is a not high enough priority where you want to take that cost on. I don't know if we'll be able to achieve much in terms of other state grants or federal grants for that small project.
In the grand scheme of bonding, that's not a big deal.
Duly noted.
Alderman O'Brien and Alderman Clemens.
Mr. Cummings, so glad you mentioned that. If you saw the minutes of the last infrastructure, it was brought up by one particular alderman to be discussed at length and extremely concerned about it. So we may actually, on that endeavor, probably ask you, why have you here before us now, to come to the next infrastructure, probably with just a brief overview, or send documentation to the committee on what the initial plans, what level we're at right now with this.
I'd be happy to do that. When is the next infrastructure committee meeting?
Usually the week of the 20th, the third week, so.
So we'd be looking at like April 24th?
Around that week, yeah. I will get back to you specifically. I'll talk to you offline from tonight's meeting to set up that next meeting.
Okay.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Clemens?
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but was part of that plan to square off that area to sell some city property?
So, yes and no. There was, as I understand it, a plan, if I'm understanding your question appropriately and I'm following the logic, quite a few years ago, prior to my arrival, there was a thought or a concept plan where maybe you could take the oval, maybe look at a parking lot that was in between the School Street lot and the oval and assemble that all and try to create a bigger package. Which if that's the case, that was a thought at one time to kind of do a one big squared off development. The private owners have not expressed an interest in wanting to move in that direction. And so that's why, while I've been here in particularly, we've been focusing on the more smaller, just school street lot development.
Follow up?
No, yeah. So and maybe I have the plans wrong in my head, but where you used to be able to go, what street is that? High Street.
Yep.
Used to be able to go straight across,
Yep.
and that's now blocked off and is a sort of a park. That's where you're talking about squaring off, correct?
Correct.
So, is it the intention of the city to sell that parcel that is now, I don't know, picnic tables, I guess?
Director Clemens? Director Cummings.
Thank you. Haven't gotten that far in the conversation. I don't know if it would be actually a lot that's developable, but it may be something to look at. The goal would be is to square off the lot. So maybe the current owner who owns the middle would be interested in doing a bigger development, but that assumes that owner would be willing to take that on. And I can't represent that is what their intention would be.
Alderman Clemens?
Yeah, the reason I bring it up is because if the intention, or if there's a will or an intention there to sort of have two parcels on either side of that courthouse, the old courthouse, what I'm thinking is that if that could go through before you do the project, that could finance the project, right? So what I'm thinking is that maybe that's a discussion that should be had prior to going forward and doing a bond, let's say, to get that project done. Maybe that might be a better idea, simply because we could take the proceeds from that and then go ahead and do the project, and you'd have those pieces of property, then the value would go up, and whoever bought them would have the benefit of having a brand new street. It'd be a win-win.
Director Cummings?
I couldn't agree more, and that is the thought process I had as well. And we've had some of those conversations very preliminarily, but the response and the feedback we've gotten is there isn't really an appetite to go in that direction. So maybe it's a conversation to have on another night, another day, in more detail. And I think, because I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have, but I just at this point can't represent to you that ambition is there. So the overall goal of trying to square off the lot, try to reintroduce that traditional street grid, calm the traffic, create a more pedestrian environment, those are all good wins. But ideally, to get that additional infill development with tax dollars would be the home run, and I just don't know if we're there yet.
Follow up, Alderman Clemens?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that and I don't mean to be critical, but I personally think we sort of put the cart before the horse with that one. But you know, it is what it is, and I think that we should really look at that, because what are we going to do if we square that off, right? Then you're going to have two pieces of property on either side of that courthouse. What are we going to do with it? Do you know what I mean?
I do.
And if we just survey that out and wait till there's a buyer, then we can do that entire project, and it won't cost the city or the taxpayers a dime.
Okay. Any additional questions in these areas? No. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is putting it back on the,
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to place back on the table R19-123 relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2020 proposed budget for the City of Nashua General Enterprise and Special Revenue Funds.
Motion on the floor is to retable R19-123. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. General discussion? Alderman Clemmons?
I just want to say to Director Cummings, while you're still here, I know I was a little critical of you the other day. Might have gotten into the media, but I do want to say that you do an outstanding job, and I have all the confidence in the world in you. And you know, we may disagree from time to time, but in general, this city is in better hands with you here. So, just wanted to say that publicly.
Okay. Any other general comments? No. No public comment. Remarks by Alderman? No. There's not a reason for a non-public. Do I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Alderman O'Brien, motion to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned at 8:11.
The only thing I'll say is that it never ceases to amaze me